In 1867, Russia sold Alaska to the United States for just 2 cents an acre. For a century and a half, that number has followed Russia like an embarrassment. The story we tell goes like this. Tsar Alexander II needed cash after a costly war, didn't fully understand what he had, and handed over a continent for almost nothing. America got lucky. Russia got played. But here's what that story misses. Russia knew exactly what was there. The question is why, despite knowing, they couldn't hold on to it. And the answer isn't financial. It isn't even political. It's geographic. Look at a map of the Russian Empire in the mid-1800s. St. Petersburg sits on the Baltic Sea, the political center, the economic center, the heart of everything. Alaska sits on the far side of the world. The straight line distance between them is roughly 4,800 miles. But in 1867, there was no Trans-Siberian Railway. There was no direct route of any kind. To supply a garrison in Alaska, Russia would have had to move men and material across the full breadth of Siberia, a landmass so vast it swallows the continental United States twice over, and then load them onto ships in the Sea of Okhotsk, and then sail north and east across the Bering Sea. The whole journey was close to 8,000 miles. Put that in more familiar terms. That's further than New York to London and back, twice, in an era when a letter from Moscow to Alaska could take 6 months to arrive. A few hundred traders clung to isolated outposts, unable to tame an interior with hostile terrain and fiercely independent indigenous nations. A permanent colonial presence, roads, forts, settlers, supply chains, was geographically impossible with the infrastructure of the 1860s. Russia didn't sell Alaska because they were desperate. They sold it because the physics of empire, distance, logistics, supply, had already made it ungovernable. But geography wasn't finished complicating things. What happened in Crimea was about to turn ungovernable into dangerous. Between 1853 and 1856, Russia fought the Crimean War. They lost. But more important than the outcome was the lesson. Britain and France had demonstrated that their naval power could project almost anywhere in the world. During the war, British warships appeared in the Baltic, in the Black Sea, and, this is the part that terrified Russian planners, in the Pacific. Russian Alaska had no defensible ports, no military garrison worth the name, no reinforcement route. The nearest substantial Russian force was thousands of miles away, on the other side of an impassable continent. In the next European war, Alaska wouldn't just be hard to hold, it would be handed to Britain in the opening months. So Russia's calculus shifted. An ungovernable territory had become a liability. Selling it to a neutral party for a real price was more rational than watching it get seized for nothing. The question was who to sell it to. France was entangled in its own European ambitions. Britain, the obvious buyer, given their Canadian territory directly adjacent to Alaska, was exactly the threat Russia was trying to neutralize. Handing Alaska to Britain would extend British naval power across the entire North Pacific Rim. That left the United States, a young country growing fast, not yet a European-style sea power that could threaten Russia's western borders. The deal began to make sense, but only because one man in Washington could see what nobody else in Congress was willing to. William Seward was Secretary of State under Lincoln and then Andrew Johnson, and in 1867 he had a theory. The 20th century wasn't going to be decided in Europe. It was going to belong to whoever controlled the Pacific. The trade routes connecting North America to Asia would become the dominant economic arteries of the modern world. And the geographic anchor point for those routes, the place that controlled the entire northern approach to the Pacific, was Alaska. Seward pushed the purchase through at $7.2 million. A few vocal critics called it Seward's folly. Partisan newspapers called it Wall Russia, a polar bear garden, a useless box of ice. They were reading the wrong map. They saw a frozen territory with no roads, no cities, no apparent value. Seward saw a geographic position. Alaska's coastline runs for 6,600 miles, more than the entire continental U.S. coastline combined. The Aleutian Islands form an arc stretching 1,200 miles directly toward Japan. Whoever controls Alaska controls the northern approach to the Pacific, the same sea lanes that now carry over $2 trillion in annual trade. The purchase price? $7.2 million in 1867 is roughly $165 million today. For comparison, the US government spends more than that every 15 minutes. Now here's where the story gets genuinely complicated. Even granting Seward's vision, even granting that the geography made the purchase rational, it's worth asking whether Russia actually made the wrong call. Let's be honest about this. The version of the story where Russia is the fool and America is the genius is too clean. From Russia's position in 1867, selling Alaska was arguably the correct geographic decision. Holding Alaska meant holding it empty, a target, not an asset. The $7.2 million was real money. The strategic relief of removing a vulnerable flank was of real value. What Russia couldn't see was what the 20th century would actually look like. They couldn't see that the oil beneath Alaska's North Slope would eventually produce 17 billion barrels, worth, at today's prices, roughly $1.7 trillion. They couldn't see that Alaska's geography would become critical to American air defense during the Cold War, placing radar stations and air bases directly in the path of any Soviet approach over the Arctic. In 1867, none of that was visible or accessible. Alaska's value was future value, dependent on infrastructure, technology, and geopolitical structures that didn't yet exist. Russia made the decision their geography forced them to make. They just made it slightly ahead of the moment it stopped being the right call. Go back to where this started. 2 cents an acre, a desperate empire. A foolish sale, a lucky purchase. That's the story we tell. But what the geography actually shows is something different. Russia sold Alaska because their geography made it impossible to hold. 8,000 miles of hostile terrain, no railway, no supply chain, no way to defend what they couldn't reach. They weren't foolish. They were governed by physics. Seward bought Alaska because he could read a different map. One oriented toward the Pacific, toward the trade routes that hadn't been built yet, toward a century that hadn't arrived yet. The price was low because the value was invisible. And the value was invisible because it was buried in a future that geography would eventually unlock. 2 cents an acre. That's not the story of a bad deal. It's the story of two empires, both prisoners of the geography they could see, and one man who understood the geography that was coming. The world has a structure. Let's keep finding it. If this video helped to reframe the map for you, there's more to find. Subscribe to keep going.